Hello, my lovelies. How are you all today? Thanks for joining me. Um, Today we are going to talk about, as promised from yesterday on my Facebook Live, I said that I would speak about some very real and deliberate emotions and dysfunctional habits that can inflict us if we are born into a dysfunctional family. Um, I made a video earlier that morning, said that we would start a sort of like a little a mini course, I guess we could say, on recognizing and acknowledging the different forms of dysfunction. So we are going to do that today. And by the way, thanks for all of you who watched and commented on the video of me cooking my slow cooked navy beans. I really appreciate that because for those of you that don't know, I love to cook. Cooking is one of my passions. And besides that, I'm going to start incorporating some video when I cook some of my meals that are in my cookbook. I have a little mini e-cookbook, and it's on Amazon. You can check it out under Patrice DeVille. Um, so yeah, so those recipes I will kind of incorporate in my daily living and do some video on them and let you guys get a glimpse of how to prepare them. It's really simple cooking. I try not to be um, technical or overly complicated in my cooking. I mean, real cooking, it's a process, but it shouldn't be overly complicated. Okay, so that being said, we're going to get back to some very dysfunctional abuses that we all may encounter. And by the way, forgive me for looking like a wet duck. I'm trying to let my hair air dry today, so I want to get it flat ironed. So it's freshly washed, and I'm just basically letting it air dry. Okay, so um, dysfunctions. I correlate dysfunctions with certain types of abuses: physical abuse, emotional abuse, and verbal abuse. Three very different forms of abuse, but all basically having the same outcome and effect on one's life. Okay? So for me, being able to recognize these abuses is the starting point to being able to understand why they are taking place, and then to understand how to possibly resolve them and stop them from going or cycling down from one generation to the next generation. Okay, so for those of you who don't know my story, I too suffered uh, some dysfunction growing up. There's no shame in my game. I suffered dysfunction. I lived in a dysfunctional family. We had problems, we had happiness, we had sadness, we had all those things. But the crux of it was dysfunction. And I know I'm not alone when I say that. And I'm actually even causing a little backlash about my book based on generational dysfunctions. And I don't mean to cause any backlash, but I do know that when people are in denial, I'm outside, guys, so there was a car just zoomed on by. Anyhow, I know that when people are in denial, they don't want to admit things that may have happened to them in their past. Um, I can't be that type of person. I have to be the type of person that needs to acknowledge something, perhaps learn from it, and then move on with it. So that's what led me to write my book, Generational Cycles, breaking dysfunctional cycles within families. So anyhow, like I said, verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Verbal abuse it's probably far worse than physical abuse. Yes, physical abuse will leave bruises. And anyone putting up with any of these types of abuses should be able to recognize them and get yourself out of that situation, because when you stay in a situation like this, all it does is prolongs the abuse, and it it cycles down to your children, our children. So it is up to us as parents, as guardians, as leaders to recognize this and then stop that, okay? So, like I said, verbal abuse, anything consisting of name calling, belittling, insults, um, anything that, any words from a spouse, friend, family member that leaves you feeling inadequate. That's verbal abuse. That's not love. If we as people can't communicate love and consideration and kindness to each other, we need to understand that perhaps we're in the wrong relationship. So pay attention to the verbal abuse. That's one of the most scarring and jarring types of abuse that I have experienced. Physical abuse, hitting, spitting, slapping, pushing, doing anything of that sort to a partner or to anyone, your children, anybody, that is considered physical abuse. And when children endure that and see that and witness that, they carry that on into their relationships. So it is imperative that we recognize where this stems from. Perhaps it was just something that we saw growing up, or we endured it, or we internalized, and we carried it over to within ourselves, and then we subconsciously allowed it to happen within our lives. And it happens. I'm that example. It happened to me. Finally, emotional abuse. Many times when people struggle with physical abuse and emotional abuse, it leaves us scarred and it leaves us detached. It leaves us not wanting to show affection and emotion and love towards others. And that's no fault of our own. It's just because perhaps we didn't learn how to exude those qualities or those emotions. We weren't taught to love. We weren't taught to say, I love you, and I need you, and you're the best. Whatever it is, some things we just were not taught because we ourselves were brought up in dysfunctional homes. And when dysfunction cycles down, usually the same things that we aren't taught are also not taught and learned by the previous generation. So they're only passing down what they know. So not only must we learn to recognize, acknowledge, and try to change these dysfunctions within our families, we must also have an understanding and compassion for people from whom we may have attained these traits from, because we don't know what they went through. We don't know what they endured, but I'm sure some of us may, if we really delve deep into the situation. That's where the understanding comes in. It's in enduring and internalizing abuse should not be blamed on anyone, because we all have our own situations. So be more understanding and caring and loving, and forgiving of those who may have inflicted abuse upon you. One part of moving on and changing your life is forgiving those who have done you harm. So whether it was that person that verbally abused you, whether it was that person that physically abused you, or you watch physically abusing someone else, or whether it was that person that was emotionally detached from us, let's just be cognizant of perhaps they had their reasons too for feeling that way or exuding those traits. So at this point, all we can do is my favorite R's. Well, I call it the RAR, R-A-R. Recognize, acknowledge, and then resolve. So let's do that. Let's change our family dynamics, and let's pay attention to certain things that may be throwing us off the cycle of healthy, happy, constructive relationships. Okay? So, wow, thanks. That was good. And I only had a couple notes, guys. So a lot of it straight off the top of my head. But I hope you learned something. Like I say, I have a lot of this thought process comes from my own past that I experienced growing up in, which led me to write my book. And you can go to Amazon.com and look up M. Patrice DeVille to find it. But that book is leading me on a journey to help other people that may have suffered from family dysfunctions and are internalizing certain pains and griefs and anxieties and don't know why. And I'm just here to help you guys. So thanks for joining. Like my video, follow me on Facebook. I do have a Facebook page, m.p.deville, facebook.com. I'm going to do some cooking segments. I'm going to do some tips and courses on dysfunctional cycles and how to resolve them. And I think it's just going to be a fun journey. So follow along, and I'm excited. So until next time, ciao. Have a blessed day, and I'll see you on the rebound.